Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our educational series. We're going to be taking a deeper dive into sake and shifting our perspectives on sake at large. My name is Darcy Sachs. I'm one of the brand managers here at Serendipity. This educational sake seminar is really all about serendipity, bringing great wine and sakes, great stories, and great people directly to you to hear their stories and to have discussions. Just general flow for today, what we're gonna do some introductions for our guests that we have on the call today. They're going to talk about the big picture for sake with us. We're gonna do a little bit of a getting nerdy, deeper dive into the sake world. And then at the very end, we'll have time for a Q&A session. Just to kind of talk about housekeeping and rules of play. If everybody who's on the call would please turn on your cameras, if you're in a spot where you can turn on your camera, and be sure to mute yourself, please, so that we don't have any interruptions throughout the presentation. Anything else to answer? No.
Enjoy it.
Yeah, you guys enjoy it. We've been really working hard to bring together all of the information. We have a link in the chat that if you go to that link, it'll pull up our website. There's a ton of support material there for sake. It gives you all the handouts that we brought to you. And it also has a link at the very bottom of that page to a order form. We are having a special offering on pricing for the 6 sakes that will be put on focus during the seminar today. You can order online. You can use the QR code that you can see at the on your screen at the bottom right-hand corner of the order form. So lots of easy ways to access this information and get the orders to your sales reps. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce our 2 guests today. We have Satoshi on the line. He is the founder and president of East West Wine Trading. He is the man behind sourcing the houses that we are presenting today, in addition to the other sake houses that he brings into the United States. He does an amazing job with finding smaller producers, really high quality producers, and brings them into the US for us. So we're super thankful to him and all of his expertise. Also, the next speaker that we have on the call today is Eduardo. Eduardo is a sake ambassador for the government of Japan, as well as for Serendipity Wines at large. He is a certified sake professional that has such passion for this field that it is very contagious. I feel like, you feel his energy, you feel his excitement. He thinks outside of the box, and he is just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the sake world. So very happy and thankful that they can join us on the call today. My compadre here at Serendipity is Mark B. He is our Serendipity sake specialist. He's our local guru for all things sake, as well as the director of chains for Serendipity at large. So anything else?
Doing great.
All right, without further ado, you guys, let's go ahead and get started. Mark, will you please hop on?
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. For those of you I've never met, my name is Mark Bigoli. I am the chain director / sake specialist at Serendipity. And we are super excited to take this deep dive journey into the world of sake. Just so everybody is informed, we are doing a Q&A. Like Darcy said, I will be monitoring that throughout the discussion. If there is a point where we can answer that topic while we're discussing the topic at hand, if you have a question regarding that topic at hand, we will try to squeeze it in. If we can't, we will certainly circle back to it and make sure we cover all the bases. And I take a second to brag on our good friends at East West. I mean, what a portfolio. There are 2 guiding principles really right now in the world of sake. One has got to be quality. That is currently, if you look at the category itself, premiumization is where the growth is coming from. Having that, and also second guiding principle I would say is super important, is having inventory and being able to sell the inventory. To work with importer that has stateside inventory and is super efficient at working the supply chains. Couldn't ask for a better partner. So without further ado, we're going to pass it on to the logistical mastermind at East West Imports. Satoshi-san, we are ready when you are, sir.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the great introduction. And my name is Satoshi. Great to meet you all. First of all, thank you to the Serendipity team for putting on this amazing opportunity for us. You know, COVID was a very painful experience for all of us, but you know, one thing that came out of it is our embrace of technology. And 3 years ago, I don't think we would have been able to do anything like this remotely with people in various locations, sharing screens, talking to each other. So once again, it is an honor to have this opportunity to talk to you all. First of all, before I even get into the overall category and growth, I just want to talk about our mission at East West Wine Trading. And what does that mean in terms of sake? Well, having grown up in Japan and seeing my grandfather drink sake, it was like how we think of Oldsmobile or Buick, basically, is, you know, not my thing. I don't want to touch it. So when the opportunity came for me to get involved in sake, one of the things we said was, number one, it's got to be, first of all, quality, like Mark said. And second of all, it needs to appeal to the palate, especially to the wine drinkers. So if you think about the overall universe of sake, it's tiny, tiny versus compared to wine, it's a much bigger place. And a lot of the premium sake drinkers do come from premium wine drinkers, premium craft beer, premium craft spirits. So that has been our guiding principle in looking at what we bring to the US marketplace. Now, talking about the overall Japanese sake industry, while we are really embracing and celebrating the drink itself, in Japan itself, the industry is actually at a crossroad in many ways. There are about 1,200 licensees that brew sake, but you know, less than probably a decade ago, that was like the number was over 2,000. And so a lot of people are retiring, they're closing their.
Yeah.
Satoshi, we lost your volume.
Good. Am I back in? Okay, awesome. Thank you. So I was talking about Japan, the sake industry being at a crossroad. Less than a decade ago, there were over 2,000 licenses. Now we're down to about 1,200. And people are really trying hard to figure out how to survive. And of that group, the forward-looking sake breweries are the ones that we are working with. They have really embraced innovation. And export is one of the growth drivers for the industry. So as you look at this chart, over the 10 years, 12 years that we've had, both volume and dollar sales of sake for export has grown tremendously. On the dollar side, it says value in billion yen. So if you think of that as about $1 million, that would be the rough equivalent in terms of the currency there. But as you can see, the blue bar is basically for the volume. The red line is for the dollar sales. There's a little bit of a drop in 18 and 19 in terms of overall dollar sales. And part of that is because of inter-Asia politics going on between Japan and other countries. So some things have slowed down. If we can go to the next slide, please. Oh, one before that one. Perfect. And we took a look at the export by destination to see what's going on behind those growth. As you can see, in terms of the export by volume from Japan to the various countries, US is the #1 destination for sake in terms of total number of liters, followed by China and Hong Kong. If you think about Hong Kong being such a small island, for them to consume that much, that's pretty impressive. But now if you look at the dollar sales, which is, or export by value, the pie chart to the right, Hong Kong is actually #1 in terms of the amount of dollars being spent, followed by China and followed by US. So we are #3 when it comes to the overall dollars being exported from Japan for sake. And we did a quick calculation and comparison between the dollar per liter, US at about $962 dollars per liter kind of a thing. And if you compare that to China, the number is pretty staggering. China spends about, or Hong Kong, first of all, actually is about 2.5 times more than what we spend on sake equivalent, followed by China about 1.3 times, and Singapore, which is a tiny little market, but it's 1.7. So obviously there is a lot more growth for premiumization in the US market. And that is the trend that we're seeing. If you can go to the next slide, please, thank you. So what's going on? As we continue to introduce small craft sake breweries here in the US, more and more American drinkers are embracing such unique and innovative breweries that also sell premium sakes. So the things that used to sit in the grocery store and collect dust, no longer. What we're seeing is people making very innovative, very new things, which we'll talk about in our comparative tasting. And the other things that are happening in Japan, and that is slowly making its way over here, is that as the sake breweries try to figure out a way to survive in this industry, they're saying they're looking at targeting the younger generation of Japanese drinkers. And these Japanese drinkers are not used to sake. They're used to Western cuisine. They're used to drinking beer, wine, and spirits. So a lot of the flavor profile of sake is now turning more towards what you would expect out of a wine drinker than you would out of sake that was traditionally sold here sold in Japan and also here in the US. At the same time, there are a number of brewers who are basically like purists. Like you hear about some of the natural wine trend going on. It's not the same thing, but in Japan, these sake brewers are basically saying, hey, you know what? I want to make sake like it was made 300 years ago with no additives, nothing, pure way that sake used to be, none of this industrial sake. So we have two very interesting trends in Japan that is slowly making its way across the ocean. And hopefully we will get to introduce many more of them to you over the years, but we wanted to share with you about at least 6 of the sakes that we have in our portfolio today. So with that, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you, Satoshi. I just had a question in the chat box. Maybe we can address now before moving to the nerdy portion of it. Are the licenses limited? I know we mentioned that there's 1,200 licenses currently, and some of those might not even be brewing. They could be just warehouses and bottling lines. Can you touch on, in terms of like the Japanese government and how they distribute those licenses, and when you apply for it, what does that process look like?
Of course. So the government is not issuing any new license for sake breweries. The government understands that the industry is still under pressure. They don't see any reason to increase the number of them, with only one exception, which is for those breweries that want to export sake. So strictly for export purposes, they're starting to issue some new licenses. As a matter of fact, the former president of Imayo Tsukasa, one of the breweries that we work with, took this opportunity, started a micro sake brewery, and he was one of the first breweries in Japan to get this license for export purposes only. So he is still working on his first batch of sake, so hopefully we'll have a chance to bring that in a very small quantity, but no new licenses whatsoever for just general sake brewing purposes.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, I think it's time to bring on the man, the myth, the legend, the judge. This guy has judged spirits competitions. He's sat on sake competitions in Tokyo. Eduardo Dingler, are you ready to rock, my man?
Always. That is the answer. Always.
It's your show, bro.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the major overhaul, the logistical. We prepared everybody to have the samples, everybody to make the time today to join us. but pretty excited to share a few sakes. It's not often we have the opportunity to taste sakes, not only side by side, but in breadth and depth as what we're about to do. So buckle up, put your seatbelts, and I think we can move on for the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about the ingredients and production of sake. So sake is made mostly of 4 ingredients. And those 4 ingredients play a very critical role and factor in each part of the outcome. So rice, there's about 200 plus strains of rice that are utilized for sake production, a little different than table rice, if you will. And each one brings a different component. There's the father rice strains, which are Yamada Nishiki, Omachi, Miyama Nishiki, some that you see more repetitively across the marketplace. But there's also other rice strains that are little by little being authorized by the Tokoku Meisho to be categorized as premium sake. What happens to the rice in the process of brewing sake? And I hope I don't lose anybody. Please leave me on the chat or whatever it is to stop me. I tend to go a little fast once I get on the fast lane. But anyway, rice gets grown, harvested. It goes through a period of drying in which, just like we get it at the store, at the local market, you get the brown rice. That's how it comes in. It comes and it goes through a polishing process in which it gets designated by the category or grade. So we'll go a little more in depth with this grades, which you see here. But basically, as I said, it's a pyramid. And let's think about this, put it in perspective. The deeper you get into the heart of the rice, the more pure, elegant, and delicate it will be. Therefore, if you look at it the other way, if you only take a little bit out of the grain of rice, it retains a little more flavor, richness, texture, and complexity. And we'll put it to the test in the sakes as we're tasting it. But basically, you have 30% or less on the polishing grade, gets you in a junmai or honjoso level of sake. So when you see a junmai or honjoso in a bottle, whether it's a wine list or a store or online, you can pretty much rest assured there's going to be a little more generosity, more flavor, more complexity overall. And then when you get beyond that, you get into the junmai ginjo or ginjo category. In those, you expect a more precise, crisp, versatile, elegant version of the sake making. So as a rule of thumb, when I see when people ask me, oh, I've never heard of this one brewery, I like to always start with their ginjo or ginjo category because it's a pretty good determinant of their style, their production, their methods that they're using. And it's just a kind of a gauge to see what if you're going to go deeper into other categories of their brewing house. Once you get into 50% or more polishing, which in some cases you can get to 1% remaining, so meaning just 1% of the grain of rice, it stays. When you get to that level, 50 plus, you start certainly uncovering all the beauty, the elegance, the heart, the shimpaku of the rice strain, and you get into a very floral, elegant style. Now, as a rule of thumb, 99% of the time, if not 98, it's roughly like that, dai ginjo and junmai dai ginjo tends to be more expensive and very simple. You have less product to work with because you at least cut half, if not beyond that, polishing of the grade. And also it takes longer to get to that level, an average about 3 days to get to the polishing of that given style of premium sake. So that's why when you see a list, pretty much inevitably the dai ginjo, junmai dai ginjo category is going to be more expensive. So you see a division here in the pyramid. And actually, Mark, if we can go back 2 more to the main page before we went to the triangle, we can cover briefly into the other ones. So koji is a very important and critical part of sake production. Koji is this mold. Throughout Japan, you'll see it being utilized for miso production, soy sauce, shochu in the distilling areas. But koji is basically this mold that, if you step back and think about it as a broad world of beverage, grape, if you grab a grape or a grape falls into a vessel from a vine when you're making wine, that inevitably the sugar in the grape combined with the ambient yeast, it's gonna turn into some sort of fermented beverage, right? In some case. So with rice, we don't have that sweetness. We are relying here on starch. It's a pure starch grain. So you need something to break it through. So if you were to put koji as a person, koji is that friend that you had in high school, college, that would really invite you to go out and party no matter what. So it's that guy that's like, no, I don't know. I don't care if there's finals. We're going to go and party tonight. And you say, okay, just one, turns into an all night. So koji is the guy that really breaks it down and brings all the party out of it. So in essence, after the rice is harvested and polished, then it goes through a steaming process. And then from there, the koji, the rice gets spread on the table, on the koji muro in the room. And then the koji gets spread on top, sort of like a Parmesan shaker that you see at a pizza shop, if you will. So after it's being poured on top, then it starts breaking down the starches, converting them into sugars, so the yeast can then come do its job and convert it into alcohol. And it's called multiple parallel fermentation. And it's pretty unique to the sake world, in which it just kind of breaks it down and turns it into that area. So you're certainly, it's critical and rely on the koji to come in, break down, and turn it in. Hope I didn't lose anybody there. On the
Eduardo,
other ingredients,
before we go into the water, we have a question that could pertain to rice and koji. So is it common for brewers to grow their own rice? Are they buying the rice? Could you touch on that for a second?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's not the most common practices to be a grower producer, as we see the trend, and obviously at Burgundy, Champagne, all the other areas where the producers actually growing its product. There are a number of brewers, but more importantly, what happens with sake across the board, across the whole country, is that they have long-standing contracts with these growers. And in many cases, and historically, the growers, the people that own the land or growing the product, are the same people that come during the brewing season in the winter and work at the brewery. So it's a beautiful ecosystem, if you will, in which everything just goes together hand in hand and everybody collaborates. It's sort of like it takes a village to develop this amazing product. So if that kind of makes sense. So I hope that answers the question.
And we have another good question in here. Are there regional variations of koji, and what is like the most common koji that's out there?
So absolutely. So yellow koji, it's the one that's utilized mostly across the board for sake production. Every traditionalist, every purist that's been brewing sake for centuries will certainly attest to that. However, we'll take some examples today actually that are utilizing white, black koji and playing with other ones. And certainly is a trend that's happening not only in Japan, but across the world. California, there's a very well-known producer that's doing it. And to play with the different koji levels and strains, if you will, it creates a completely different style. Higher acidity, just to blame part of that, the way that the fermentation happens, and it goes to dry styles. But yeah, to answer that question, yellow is a standard. It's utilized across the board. And when you're tasting a sake that it's not, you'll know that that there's definitely been some play with the koji. Cool.
Thank you.
We'll jump then to the water. So water is very important. I mean, as all the elements are very important, water is to sake as water is to a distillery or a beer brewery. So if you're talking about whiskey of the world, for instance, right? The water that you see in Kentucky, in bourbon, it's different than the water that you see in Scotland, right? So therefore, they're in combination with other factors, what you produce is completely different. So minerals in the water have a huge role. And as I said, it applies also to a beer brewery where your brewery is. That's the water you get. In certain examples, you can truck it, but it's cost prohibitive and ludicrous. It's done though. So water basically if you think about it, it comes in two different styles: hard water with a very rich mineral content in the palate. As you let it sit for a second, it gives you a little more richer, complex, weightier kind of mouthfeel. And then there's soft water, which really translates to a very silky, low mineral content and very elegant. Certain areas, I mean, if you were to divide the map of Japan, north tends to be generally softer water, where the south tends to be a little more richer, complex. And it's a good generalization that sort of like mimics certain countries like Italy, for instance, where the wines of the north are guided by a different style than the ones in the south. But we won't get too deep into that. Certainly, as I mentioned, the water is where the brewery is. Certain indicators have played a big role into regionality and how that plays, for instance, Niigata, where it's in the western central part of Japan, blessed by this mountain ranges, and we'll go a little deeper into that. But basically, during the 1500s, there was a huge number of breweries starting in those days, really exploding in the 1800s. And to this day, it's Niigata's the prefecture with the highest number of breweries, just about 90 right now, which tells you something. And the reason is the water. The water comes from the mountain ranges. It's a snow melt, and then as it comes down, it really plays a big role in there. Now I'll move along because I know I can get caught and go deeper into the rabbit hole. But yeast is super important, as we know, for all alcoholic beverages. And I'll tell you a quick story that kind of helped me realize what yeast is. When I was working with the Morimoto Restaurant Group, Chef Morimoto has this beer with Rogue Brewery in Newport, Oregon. So one day, Chef and I go visit them, and we're touring the brewery. We're sitting down, owner and the master brewer. If you could picture John, the master brewer, is this guy who looks like Fidel Castro. Long beard, overalls, rides his bike everywhere, crazy dude. They come up with some insane beers out of the box. So we're sitting there just tasting at the little tasting room, and I look up and I see a beard beer. And I ask Brett, who's the president, I said, "Hey, Brett, I've never heard of that one. What's the deal with the beard beer?" He said, "Okay, in long story short, I'll tell you, but we have to taste it first." So we tasted, little nutty, elegant, kind of like Newcastle, pretty fun beer. So he says, we were trying to play with the yeast from our hop fields. We were trying to, basically, you get like a Ziploc bag with a Q-tip, you go around the fields, you can get yeast out of anywhere. A lot of sake breweries are playing with fruit, like banana, strawberry, flowers, lilac, all these different ones. So anyway, they go to the hop fields and they grab the Q-tip and they put it through the hops, put it in the Ziploc bag. They do that exercise twice, send it to the lab, and it doesn't take. For whatever reason, just the yeast died. It didn't really proliferate. So one day, as a joke, they go to John and say, "John, let me see your beard." Stick the Q-tip swab in the beard really deep. Who knows when's the last time he washed it. They put it in the Ziploc bag and ship out, and it takes. The lab says, "Hey, whatever you sent us, here it is." So they started making a beer with it. So in that sense, that's how it really affects. So yeast lives everywhere. We have it in our skin. It lives in your house. So you could make sake or any other beverage with just the ambient yeast that's living in the walls in your house, if you will, right? So very important. However, for premium sake production and other styles, you rely, just like everything, on labs and science. So a lot of the yeast strains that we see typically in sake are cultured yeast. So I got the pleasure of going to a yeast bank in Kyushu a couple of years ago, and it's amazing. It's this lab where they proliferate only yeast number 7, and they have it in fridges. And so if I own a brewery and that's what I want to do, I just call them up and say, "Hey, shoot me up a few vials," and that's what you introduce into your sake, right? So each yeast gives a lot of aromatic impact into what we're producing. So 7, 9, 1801, which is very popular these days, it's a non-foaming yeast, tends to have a little more bubblegummy, cherry, cotton candy, kind of a powdered sugar kind of aroma, which you will identify. I don't care if you're a novice or an expert in sake. It's really easy. If you have a few sakes in front of you, just smell them. And if you get the really bubblegummy banana notes, it's certainly one of those yeasts. And then there's the other yeast strains, which are as I mentioned, a little more ambient. A lot of the times they just happen in the brewery. So very fun, quite fascinating. And if you want to go deeper, we can always talk about yeast strains. Now, that's the 4 main ingredients. The 5th ingredient, just like the Beatles had Bill and Preston in the Keys every once in a while, it's brewer's alcohol. And we'll get to taste one here in a second. So brewer's alcohol, it's introduced into the sake, into the finished product after fermentation to they add a little bit of about 10%, and then they water it down. What that creates, it's a very focused, lifter aromatics, more precise style. So I invite everybody, if you haven't done so, pour yourself the Hirai and the Echigo Zakura Futsushu if you have 2 glasses, and then we can start tasting side by side, because why not? We're here, you have it in front of you. And certainly, so let's start here. And let's start with intro to value sakes, but not only value as a proposition that's easily attainable, but also, as I mentioned earlier, this category, the Junmai, Futsushu, Honjoso, all these areas, they tend to be a little more richer, complex, and therefore more versatile with food. So the Hirai Junmai, this brewery is in Niigata, and it's in the foothills of the Eigon Mountains. And what they do here, Koshino Sukano is the name of the brewery, and they're all about preserving artisanship, craftsmanship, complexity, richness. When we first got to visit the brewery, you walk in, first of all, and it's like a scene from Kill Bill. It's got this rice paper walls, dojo floor, and then we walk to the back. And I mean, this is a brewery that's been brewing since the 1800s, so it has a lot of history. You can feel it. That day, it was during brewing season, and they were actually steaming the rice. And I can close my eyes and just get the aromas and the smells. Super fascinating. So in this sake in particular, which hopefully, as I said, everybody has it, you see a little bit of color. There's some richness. The rice strain is one of Niigata's own Gohyaku Mangoku, which grows ideally in the region. And it tends to have a little more expressive richness, breadth in the style. This is a style that it's poured great at a room temperature, even with a little heat, and obviously out of the fridge cold, and it gives you a completely different perspective. I get a little more of a nougat, caramelized mushroom, but nothing too funky or aggressive as sakes could get, but it does have that richness, texture, a little bit of milk chocolate caramel. And I don't know if you guys agree. And Mark, do you have any notes in there?
Yeah, I think you hit it with the marshmallow. I was actually at a dinner a few nights ago and somebody else mentioned marshmallow. So I get nothing but marshmallow from here on out.
It's interesting. It's certainly marshmallow, but not in a sweet way, right? It's a little more of the breadth, the richness. And I think to note as a rule of thumb, Junmais, which means pure rice, the word Jun pure Mai rice, it means there's only the 4 ingredients, as we mentioned earlier, tend to be a little more viscous, richer, rounder in the mouthfeel, where in the other styles, when you add the Honjoso, the brewer's alcohol, it creates a little leaner, more focused style, livelier, if you will. So for the sake of keeping up with time, we'll taste the Echigo Zakura Futsushu, which the word Futsushu is one of those you have to just get near with a little with a fair warning. So Futsushu, it could be a style that's produced with lower quality products. It could be brewer's alcohol, obviously added, or it could have a little bit of fruit or other things. In this case, this Futsushu, it's made of Menkoina rice, which it's not an authorized varietal for premium. So that is the main difference here. But you're looking at a style that's elegant, soft, very approachable. This is the style that you just put it in the fridge for a while, put a straw through it, and you can go to the park, hang out with your friends. You can just, it's a very chill, easy drinking, smooth style, even a touch, a kiss of sweetness that I find. But I get on the nose a little bit of like the peach skin, just like fresh off the tree. and then it just gets into a very elegant style. So when you're looking for the no-brainer kind of sake that just it's a any day of the week, it's kind of. And we see a question for Leslie, and you're completely right. So table wine, it's the equivalent. Food sushi is the equivalent of like vin de table in France, where sometimes, or like in Italy, right, where sometimes they're not authorized into the DOCG, but it's just a plain out-of-box style. So you will see more and more. The topic in Japan these days is that people are sort of doing away with the grades of premium sake, and not to sacrifice quality or ingredients, but to defy the norm out of it. Something like Sasekaya did in the 60s in Tuscany, where they said, well, screw you, I want to do Bordeaux varietals in Tuscany. So same thing, we start seeing a big movement coming up in Japan like that. So yes, food sushi, it's like table wine. And certainly a completely different style here of both Niigata producers, but within the realm of traditionalism and sort of a focus style. Hirai Junmai is usually my burger sake. You'll find me like about once a month. I'll cheat the diet, have a bacon cheeseburger, and I'll hide in a corner and I'll enjoy a glass of Hirai. And it's just amazing. Same thing applies to pizza, which a lot of the sakes do, but this one kind of has that breadth and richness to it, where the Echigo Zakura, it's like hey, it's Tuesday night, it was a long day, let's just open a bottle and pour it and drink it like water, right? Kind of think like that. Oh, Darcy
Eduardo,
has a great question.
It'd be a good time to also touch on that this is a Namachozo, being, Nama is a really popular seasonal sake.
Yes, so Nama refers to, thank you for pointing that out, it's unpasteurized. So sake goes through a pasteurization period, usually 2 steps, once after fermentation and once before shipping. So in this case, it's a once pasteurized only. So it's a Namachozo, and it retains a little liveliness in the palate, in addition to having the Honjozo and what Menkoinas bring into the party. You get a little bit of that. Namas, you will come across a good number of namas in the marketplace these days, and more growing, but it was a style of production. Think about, I've talked to brewers in Japan where they said, I don't want to export my nama because it's like sending your kid to college who's only 6 years old, right? So it's like, you don't have the knowledge, the protection from the elements. So nama has to be handled very carefully, always in a cold chain from production to shipping to storing and serving, because the moment that it sees either sunlight or heat, you can really spoil that style. So in this case, it has the one-time pasteurization, which kind of gives it an extra layer of membrane to protect. But yeah, when you do see namas, make sure if they're at the store, they're always properly refrigerated. If you get them at your restaurant or at home, always keep them in the fridge. And they can be fantastic. They carry that sort of tension and elegance and kind of uplift, as opposed to a regular sake, which nothing to take away from that. I see a question from Darcy, which I'd love to assess and address right now. So best serving vessel for sake, aside from straws in the park, which is always a good yes. However, so generally, traditionally, and in a very romantic way, we have ochokos, right? Or any ceramic vessel, little cups, right? Which are utilized in a very traditional setting. So a beautiful thing about Japanese culture that you will see if you go to a formal setting, whether it's at a home or a restaurant with Japanese proper etiquette, everybody gets their little ochoko and everybody pours for each other, meaning you never pour your own. So it really encapsulates the culture where everybody looks after each other. They're little, they're about 1.5 ounces generally. So it goes fast and you just constantly looking. It is all beautiful, it's fun. However, when you're drinking sake out of a wine glass, and I don't know if you can see my screen even, but when you have a wine glass, you really, I mean, the glass companies, first of Riedel, Schutzwiesel, Gabriel, all these guys, they have been doing their work for I mean, centuries, dare to say, in which they have explored different ways that the aromatics come out of the glass. But not only that, also the way that it hits your mouth. So the opening on the wine glass and the thinness of it, it really allows for the breadth and depth into it. So I invite you to, if you do have a couple different glasses later on or right now, try it and see the same sake in different vessels and how it explodes. However, as a rule of thumb in my household, we always try to do wine glass or stemless glasses with the bulb that kind of play out. Now, Riedel has come up with a couple sake-specific glasses. The Junmai, which is a little more open, almost looks like a martini glass with a tulip on top, which is great for those bigger, richer styles. And then they also have a Daiginjo glass, which to me is like a play on their Riesling glass. It's a smaller tulip, a little more focused on the aromatics and the way it hits the palate. Cool. I don't know if I missed any other, but we can talk about those questions.
Yeah, let's keep moving.
Shall we move on to the slide?
Let's do it.
Excellent. So here's where you really need to buckle up, put your helmet, and have fun, because we're going to explore two different styles that are really out of the box. What Satoshi-san alluded to earlier, Imayo Tsukasa, when we first came across them, we were fascinated by their youthful and playful interpretation of sake out of the box. I mean, honestly, the first time we fell in love with them was this bottle, the Koi, which we saw when we got out of the train station in Niigata station. And we were fascinated and kind of attracted like bugs to light by it. And then we went to visit their brewery, which is very near the station in Niigata proper. They started brewing in the 1700s, and they have a lot of years under their belt as far as production. So the current team, it's a very young team. They're in the mid to low 30s, and they really do things, as I mentioned, out of the box. So if we're starting with the black, the Imayo Tsukasa Black, it is a very dry, actually dare to say one of the driest sakes in the marketplace, plus 15 on the SMB scale, which we'll touch on in a little bit, and has a very, I would say, rich, elegant, but watch the mouthfeel, because the way it hits your palate, especially in the retronasal, it has this tension, vibrancy, and mineral components to me as sincere, dare to say. So a very lively, almost peppery in the back end. I mean, I've never had a sake like that until I had this one, which was really just shocking for me to see. An ideal sake with steak. So they actually promote it like that at the brewery, and I've come across several examples where either a ribeye with just salt and pepper off the grill, or portobello mushrooms, or even eggplant with a little bit of salt and pepper. Best friends. It loves the richness, the meaty component. It breaks down the fat very nice. And also when you chill it, I've served it for friends at parties, and it replaces a lot of times a martini, because it has that dryness, the richness. I have a friend who's an opera conductor, and he tends to be the fancy guy with the bow tie in the room all the time. And I poured him one of these once, shaken, and he put olives in it, and he went through 2 bottles by the end of the night as he was singing. But anyway, long story short, a very dry style, brute force, rich, elegant. I love that the nose, you have to look for it, but there's like a forest floor component of like dried leaf, dried shiitake, spiced and elegant and almost herbaceous. And then we jump into the Ima, which is the beautiful geisha sister of the black. Now the Ima is, as somebody just said actually in the chat, it's very wine-like. I mean, in many ways and in a few words, very Gewürztraminer-like, Vouvray. It's got some of those notes, very floral, almost Condru in some way, where the bouquet on the nose gives you all this yellow flowers, purple flowers, a lot of blossoms, elegant, a little bit of citrus hitting in there, but it's more of a sun-kissed citrus, I like to call it, like this Amalfi lemon that sat in the sun a little too long. And then it has this juiciness with really ripe peach and such. What this sake is basically based out of a Riesling style, And Satoshi tells the story better, but basically the brewery in their avant-garde style, they decided to put the whole team to the test. And Niigata is very well known for the oysters, this big sake, this beautiful oysters that are all around the coast. So they said, let's come up with the best pairing for the oysters. And I mean, single-handedly, they came up with an amazing product that is the best friend of a seafood tower, but not only a stop there, but also anything with a little spice like curries, Indian, Thai curry, moles, anything with that enough spice to it. But what I love about this sake is that it's so generous, so giving. However, the acidity, it cuts like a spine through it in the middle, and it cleanses the palate in many ways for all the sums that are here, like a Riesling would, like an Ashley's level, or Speyer from the Rheingau, where it has that generous yet cuts through with the little spine in there, and it just ends up in a very cleansing style. Now notice here, for all the science oriented and nerds like me, same rice strain, Gohyaku Mangoku, which, as we mentioned earlier, it's Niigata's own kind of it grows ideally in the Niigata region. Also both polished to the same ratio, so there's no much difference here. The water is the same water that's being utilized, but what you're playing here, it's mostly it's proprietary, but KOJI levels are really, and fermentation temperatures and all this are really alluding and giving a completely different just product at the end. So
so Eduardo, we had a
questions there, Mark?
question. Yeah, we had a question. So I guess you probably just answered it in that breakdown. How do they get the Imai Sukasa Black Junmai to taste so dry? Is
So
that all
basically,
proprietary?
you're here. It's proprietary, but I dare to say and speculate, because they're really secretive about it, but it's something that's being done across the country and I said abroad as well. The yeast that they're utilizing, combined with the KOJI levels of white and black even, it's really fermenting to dry. So just like an Asahi super dry beer, right? The Karakuchi, it really, what you're playing here is it's a yeast that's so ambitious and so hungry that's going to take on all the sugars to really leave this very cleansing style. So an electric kind of finish. Pretty fun.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see all the same rice, same polish ratio, same water, but you have two sakes that are extreme manifestations on the SMV on total different spectrums. So that's they are masters at their crafts for sure.
It's night and day. So the first time I ever saw this, guys, was at a festival called Niigata Sake no Jin, and it's a massive, the world's largest event that hopefully will come back next year. But the year that I went was 140,000 people in 2 days, and it's massive. All the brewers from Niigata are there. You walk in, people are stretching like they're running a marathon before the entrance, and you get your little choco and go and taste. And the average person was very reflective of the state of the industry in Japan, where it's an older crowd, if you will, 40s, 50s plus. However, when I saw the table, there was two in particular, the Imayo Tsukasa table and the Takachiyo table, which we'll talk another time. They just had a crowd around their booth of a very younger crowd, like 20s, low 30s even, but packed. So that was always very attractive. And what they're doing, and to touch on briefly on the state of the industry in Japan, without getting too lost, to keep me honest here, Mark. So in Japan, what's happening in the last few decades is something that parallel happened in Europe with wine. So Spain, France, Italy, they saw this kind of loss of the youth to other beverages. So where in Italy, France, and somewhat in Spain, they're somewhat corrected and got the younger crowds interested in wine rather than going for craft beer or cocktails or other spirits. It really hasn't really caught on in Japan. Basically, the young guys are saying, no, we have options, and sake is like my grandpa drink or my parents drink, and I want to try other things. So producers like this, like Imayo Tsukasa, are really breaking the mold and attracting a crowd by defying the whole perception of sake, which is pretty fascinating. So,
Speaking of
and as I
defying,
see here by
yeah,
taking my cue, we're going to move to the next one.
Yamagata.
Yes. So now we're not in Kansas anymore, as they say. We're gonna jump to Yamagata, and I think the slide is the next one. But Yamagata is a little higher than Niigata. I've been there a couple times. The first time, actually, we took a bus, and it literally felt like you're on a roller coaster ride for about an hour, just climbing all the way up, and you're just waiting for the curse. And basically, that's what it is. You're at a high elevation. Yamagata is on its own area, and it creates a beautiful ecosystem and styles that they produce. Let's talk a little bit about the region. It is it's known for one of the best cattle growing areas. They have amazing beef. They're high elevation. Their water is pristine because they're on top of the mountain ranges. And also, because of that, because of the whole ecosystem and geographical and climatic features, the rice varieties they grow are a little different. The Wanosato and Dewa Sansan take the lead of the pack. And Yamagata, because of their style of production and their ingredients, they became the first GI or geographical indication in Japan, leading the pack. Now there's over a dozen of them, and more prefectures taking note and really celebrating their own regionality and styles. But Yamagata was the lead of the pack. And if you taste this sake, it really, I mean, when you taste Yamagata blind, it'll stick out like a sore thumb out of a room. There's a couple components here. You have violets, you have lilac, you have licorice seed, all these different components. The anise that kind of comes through in the sake is incredibly lush. It's like, in many ways, it's like that Instagram filter that's really bright. When you're just like, whoa, everything's just like super colorful. And also in the palate, not only in the nose, like if you pour in a glass and do a little swirl, you'll get it across the room. But the palate, taste that, it's juicy, it's elegant, it's viscous, it's got this like all this muscle around it that really coats the palate, and it just makes your mouth water. Amazing sake that I love with like define like pairings with like Mexican food, or even some barbecue with like a tangy barbecue sauce and things like that. Super fun and delicious. This is a brewery that also started in the 1800s, Otoshuzo, and this is a Junmai Ginjo, which is pretty fun, elegant, as I mentioned, and just fascinatingly delicious. Now, we'll move into back to Niigata. And as we mentioned earlier, a couple of the features are the Eshigo Mountains, which is like the Japanese Alp that cut through the country. It's a spine that you see. And basically, as I said, it collects a lot of the snow. Some of the highest snowfall in the country of Japan. Sometimes they'll go like 10, 15 feet in a season. The water, therefore, it just travels down the mountain, very soft, elegant. And then you have the certain strains of rice that grow ideally in this region. As we mentioned, Gohyaku Mangoku, which we're now very well acquainted, but also what other styles? There's a little bit of the Yamada Nishiki grown in there, but the other one is Koshino, Kosh Tanrei, which is sort of like the thank you also. Kosh Tanrei is kind of like the answer of Yamada Nishiki, which is like one of the godfather rice strains of Japan. As we know, it's like the Cabernet Sauvignon of Japan. So in this case, we're looking at that. We're looking at Yamada Nishiki grown in the Hyogo region of Japan and brought over to Niigata. And here we're looking at the higher polishing grade at the Daiginjo level, creating more of an elevated style, elegant, but at the same time, it has a very compelling component here. A very floral, but we're looking more on the mandarin blossom, a little more of a yellow flower, white flower, kind of like on that aromatic level, fruity in some sense, but also if you watch the way it hits your palate, it's like precise, and it has a little bit of like energy going on there. Very, very delicious sake, and also ends with a little bit of note of like dark chocolate that bitterness. I don't know if you guys get it, but it leaves you wanting more. It's really beautiful, like geranium, dark chocolate, elegant, lush, and very, very fun. Comes in the 300 ml, and it's just like an everyday kind of, I don't know, some sort of luxury every day without breaking the piggy bank too. This was pretty fun. So the difference between having visited these breweries, especially in this too, Goto Shuzo is fifth generation father and son team that every bottle they make, they pretty much touch with their own hands. Touring the brewery with them, it's tiny, very magical place, highly sought after in Japan, where the Echigo Zakura, they managed to deliver almost like a Dasai or a Porsche experience, if you will. Somebody put it like this in a few words. Certain breweries like Goto can be more of a pushing it like a Lamborghini, right? Every bottle, it's handheld and put together by humans, where Dasai and other breweries like Echigo Zakura they have figured out the way to produce at a higher scale with high level of quality and consistency, which is the key there. So when we visited Echigo Zakura, we went there and they have all these proprietary machines, and it almost looks like a villain from a Bond movie's place, like all beautiful, sterile, a lot of stainless steel and all these crazy machines that you don't know what they're being used for, but it's clockwork. Everything they produce, a high level, elegant, and I mentioned they try to source the highest quality ingredients. So super fun, quite different, and I mean, hopefully this side-by-side perspective has been fun for you guys. Absolutely.
Eduardo, I'm going to run through a couple questions that we missed in the chat box if you want to dive into that. We have one question. Are there ever non-aromatic yeast strains used in sake?
There are, but they're not favored. So there are yeast that just simply do their job. But what's really the point? I think what the point of the brewer or the toji is here to identify what the style of the brewery is, whether it has been done for hundreds of years or it's a new style. But the job is to kind of bring a little elegance and things. But yeah, to answer the question, there are some, but you won't come across them often.
It's a great way to put that in perspective. And then if you want to just kind of Nihon Shodo SMV, if you want to just touch on that a little bit, I know it's a pretty interesting point for some people to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nihon Shodo or sake meter value is basically a way to give us an idea of the sweetness or dryness in a sake, and it's basically based on gravity, on the way that the sake is tested out. Not always, in my experience, super accurate, because as we're tasting, I mean, the Ima and the black are the best examples, right? The Ima has a very low delineation there. However, the way it drinks, because the acidity, it's very cleansing and almost takes away some of the sweetness. But generally, just remember, higher is drier, and the scale kind of goes +10 and -5, the marketplace, what we see, especially in the export. But yeah, when you do see a +15, you pretty much know it's going to be a super dry style. And when you start getting into the -1, -2, it's going to be generous. So those are the ones that you put the spicy dishes and more complex stuff.
Absolutely. Another good question. I believe on the Hirai Junmai slide, we saw it at a 60% polish, and it's just referred to as a Junmai. So can you touch a little bit on that instead of a Junmai Ginjo?
Yes, it took me a while to wrap around that when I was starting to study sake. So a lot of the breweries will go the extra mile in terms of the polishing and don't always put it on the label. And the reason is, there's multiple reasons. One of them is the brewery just simply wants to deliver a higher quality product at a lower range or price, if you will, or category. Other reasons could be that the brewery already makes a Junmai Ginjo and they don't want to compete with that, but they feel the master brewer felt like the polishing at this ratio is what delivers the best product that they can. So it could be some sort of internal competition already with the brewery, or just like a delivering a little more elegance and more bang for your buck, if you will.
Does this is a great question. Does every prefecture make sake?
Yes, they do. I mean, some, as we mentioned, Niigata on the top of the pack in terms of breweries, 90 of them. However, Hyogo, Nara Prefecture, has the biggest output because some of the bigger houses like a Keikan have an insane output of sake, and they make the most sake out of all of them. Some of them only have like 2 or 3 breweries, but they all have a brewery, pretty much.
And last but not least, what is the highest level of ABV allowed in sake to be legally defined as?
Well, to tell you the truth, there's no real cap. However, there are, those are called genshu, or undiluted styles, right? So most of the sake, 99% of it, gets a little dilution before it's bottled, in which the ABV will come to around 16%. Some that you will see genshu or undiluted will actually have a little more richness, more elegance, and some of the alcohol will go up to 22%. There's a couple very good ones in the marketplace that have that, and they drink really easy. And it's super easy to go to a place and drink a bottle with your friends. And then when you stand up, you're like, whoa, now we need an Uber. And the next day might hurt.
I love this question. I know it's probably going to send you far down the rabbit hole, but what non-traditional sake pairing excites you the most?
Oh man, we have another hour. So there's a lot of alternatives out there. I love I don't know, barbecue with sake. It's fascinating. It really pushes it. A very fun and easy one is pizza with sake, with a little more generous style like hirai or such. They really interact amazingly, but in a basic level, cheese and sake all day. You can bring me like 10 different cheeses from throughout France and Italy and domestic ones and put them on a table, and we'll have like 4 sakes and just be the most amazing experience around the table. Other one is just Mexican food, just simple taco truck, simple tacos, and sake really wrap around. Somebody said, yeah, honjoso and fried chicken, count me in. My mouth's watering, and I think it's lunchtime for all of us soon.
And I like this one. So Nagori obviously is super popular. A lot of people tend to refer to it as unfiltered sake. We know that's not the case, but Moroka is the real unfiltered. Do you want to just give a breakdown on that as quickly as you can?
Yes, and I'll give a quick story on Moroka, which I know you love, Mark. A couple hundred years ago, there was a brewery, and usually the brewing season in Japan is from October 1st to like roughly March, April, during the cold time. So there's a brewery worker, a kurabito, that gets fired from the brewery, which is crazy because in Japan, generally people never get fired, right? Once you have a job, you can have that job for 40 years if you're alive. So this guy gets fired for whatever reason. The story doesn't say, but he gets so angry that he grabs some charcoal, some ashes from the adjacent fire, being winter, and he grabs them and throws them in the tank of this brewing sake. And he just gets so angry, he says, screw you, I'm gonna ruin your sake, and leaves. Next day, the brewery workers come and check on the sake, and it's amazing. All this ashes and charcoal kind of cleanse the sake, just very much like we use these days in a Brita filter at home to kind of take some of the impurities away. So the brewery, it's like a miracle. They become very famous. They single-handedly changed the style of that everybody brews and the color and everything. And the guy probably went and jumped off a tree or something, and I don't know, or just hung himself, being so angry. But basically, that's what happens. Muroka, it's the absence of charcoal filtration. So some styles, you get a little more of a coloration, coppery, yellow, some opaque notes. And that is because they skip that to retain a little more flavor, more complexity and richness. But most of the sake goes through that filtration to kind of have that very clean absence of extra stuff in the glass. Where Nigori, it's unfiltered in the sense that some of the leaves are reintroduced or coarsely filtered on the sake to retain a little more richness, more kind of a pasty component and more textural which funny enough, the US is the leading consumer by far of Nigori sake, which is completely understandable. And then there's origarami, which is that, as Jamie said there, very, it's less sweet, yes, indeed, but it's super fun because it's vibrant, high acidity, very, I mean, in some ways, very natural wine-like, where it has that fizz to it. Actually, a lot of origarami styles, when you open them, you have to be super careful, and you can Google it. You can go down the rabbit hole, but basically people will put a bowl on top and open it very carefully, because otherwise it'll explode in your face.
And then we had one more. Do we have time for one more, Leslie?
I'm in for one more.
One more question. What is the difference? And I've asked you this before, and you might be able to give us the answer. The difference between Dewa Santo and Dewa Sansan out of Yamagata. What is the?
So basically, what you're looking at, I mean, you might ask 3 people and get 3 different answers, but my 2 cents, and also I'd love to hear Satoshi's hands if he has one of his own, but we haven't talked about this much. But basically, Dewa no Sato has a little more depth and breadth in the palate. So when you want to create a more richer, broad style of sake from Yamagata, you will use Dewa no Sato, because it has a little more richness and weight as it sits generally. Where Dewa Sansan is usually utilized for the elevated styles like Daiginjos, Junmai Daiginjos, giving you a little more ethereal, more silky, more lively, an elegant style, if you will, in a few words. So if you grab one producer and you grab Dewa no Sato and Dewa Sansan, you kind of know that the Dewa no Sato is going to deliver a little more punch in terms of like the way it sits on your palate. Therefore, a little more flexibility with pairings, where you can go with smoked meats, you can go with cured meats, things like that. Where Dewa Sansan will be that elevated, beautiful lady with all this makeup and just dressed up for the night.
Eduardo, Mark, Satoshi-san, thank you guys so much for sharing your knowledge and all of your stories. I could literally sit here and listen for another hour to all of the great the stories that Eduardo has been bringing to us today. So really appreciate it, guys.
Yeah.
Please
And
feel free to
There you
follow through. Thank you so much, Darcy and the whole team. You guys are outstanding.
Of
Cheers.
course, of course. Thank
Thank
you guys for
you.
joining us on this deep dive into sake. We'll see you at the next seminar.